Thanks everybody for joining us this afternoon for In Between Challenges and Innovations in Implementation and Management of Transformative Agreements at Mid-Sized Institutions. My name is Jamie Saragosi. I'm the Associate Dean for Content Services at Stony Brook University, and I'll allow my colleagues and co-presenters to introduce.
Hi everyone, I'm Kimberly Kennedy. I'm the Content Acquisitions Lead at Stony Brook University.
I'm Amy Pham. I'm the Senior Electronic and Open Content Librarian at the University of San Diego.
And I'm Maria Stavova, Senior Director for Collections, Metadata, and Resource Sharing at the Claremont Colleges in California.
And if you can't hear us because we're cutting out the microphones, feel free to shout at us or raise your hand. We'll figure it out.
Okay, so I'm sure we've all seen the code of conduct at some point today. The QR code is there for anyone who would like to review it in full. And just so that we're all on the same page for today's presentation, we'll be discussing transformative agreements and how they're impacting institutions of small to mid-size in terms of FTEs using the Carnegie classification. I've put up this definition from the Scholarly Kitchen. It was originally published in 2019. But just in general, you may hear us talking about read and publish agreements, transformative agreements, TAs. There's a lot of nuances and a lot of differences to the way that these agreements are coming to fruition, which is why I think it was important for us to do this research to see how different institutions and our peer institutions were handling these, defining these, accommodating the requests from our faculty and research community. So my colleague, Kimberly, and I will be taking a macro view. We'll be talking about some of the research that we've done at our institution, and then we have our co-presenters who will be taking kind of a more micro view, who will be talking about how it's impacting them at their particular institutions through a few case studies. So at our institution at Stony Brook University, we currently are only engaged in read-only traditional subscription models. We have one discounted APC program with a publisher, but we have no transformative agreements in our portfolio at this time. We've been a little hesitant to engage on this front due to lack of funding. We have flat budgets, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. And just to give you an idea, for the purposes of this presentation, we focused on small to mid-sized organizations, recognizing that based on the agreements, various agreements with publishers, Stony Brook being an R1, being a high research output institution, we would likely fall into the larger categories, but we really wanted to see, based on our peer institutions with similar budgets and similar staffing levels, how they were handling these agreements. So you can see that at our institution, we had flat budgets. We're dealing with some staffing challenges. So the objective of our research was to try to identify commonalities among our peer institutions and hopefully uncover some innovative strategies for overcoming or for implementing some of these newer types of agreements. So for our research study, we got IRB approval. We did a simple Google form survey. It was a mixed method study. Both quantitative and qualitative data was collected. We did some coding based on the major themes that came through in our qualitative kind of open-ended responses. It was intentional for us to limit to the United States when we were doing our targeted distribution of the survey, because we all know that the various policies, practices, and legalities in different countries may impact how quickly people are responding to the offerings of transformative agreements. And just to full disclosure, there were a few limitations. The majority of the respondents that we received feedback from have at least one transformative agreement in their portfolio. So those who are already engaged in the practice were more likely to respond to us. So we may not see all of the challenges represented in the answers that we had received from our community. And general financial impact was reported, but not in specific proportions. So we're not sure based on a total budget how much was actually reallocated to transformative agreements. So we were just asking if it was positive, negative, or neutral in terms of impact to the overall budget. So we do plan on having a phase 2 to this research study where we'll be reaching out to some institutions, hopefully to do some more in-depth interviews and really kind of get into some of the impacts and some of the particulars in terms of budget. So the demographic of our respondents, 37% were from small to mid-sized institutions, again, based on the Carnegie classifications. And 63% of our respondents were from larger institutions. Overall, more public than private have responded to our survey. And there was a skew in the smaller to mid-sized institutions where we kind of pulled out that data. More of those institutions were private. Staffing levels, very interesting, less than 5 librarians. 85% of our respondents have less than 5 librarians in their collections or acquisitions area. And that number rose to 64% had less than 5 librarians in small to mid-sized institutions. So just right off the bat, kind of laying the landscape, we can see that we're all kind of in the same boat, struggling for personnel to address some of these issues. And I will hand it over to Kimberly, who will get more into the data. This is still me. Sorry. If your institution has active transformative agreements, so this is how we had a response. It was actually very interesting to see that 48.3% had responded that they have 5 to 10. But you can see right behind that, our second highest response was at 34%. So it was less than 5 agreements at their institution. So it seems like people are coming to a slow adoption of this new model. Okay, now Kimberly will get into the data.
Thank you. Yeah, so one interesting point of contrast in our survey responses was around the effect of transformative agreements on open access publishing. While about 75% of respondents reported an increase in open access publishing through their transformative agreements, 63% either responded neutrally or negatively to the question, are transformative agreements an effective strategy for transitioning to open access publishing? So there is some disconnect here. And based on the responses to other questions in our survey, we think this is coming from a concern about the long-term sustainability of transformative agreements, especially around the cost and management of them. Here. So about half of our respondents did see an increase in their subscription cost in transformative agreements. About 45% saw no change or had mixed results depending on the agreement, and only 6% saw a decrease. But notably, when we filtered the results down to small to mid-sized institutions, that number dropped to 26% who saw an increase, and 15% actually saw a decrease in their subscription costs. So from our survey results, it seems like small to mid-sized institutions might actually be seeing a bit more cost effectiveness than larger institutions. And when asked about the management of transformative agreements and what strategies they've adopted, most respondents, about 54%, reported giving additional responsibilities to existing staff, compared to about 7% who reported hiring new staff members who are either dedicated partially or completely to managing these kinds of agreements. And 23% mentioned some kind of team approach, so trying to avoid putting all that extra work onto just one person. Some respondents mentioned having external support in managing subscriptions, transformative agreements, such as additional help from publishers or management through a consortium. And interestingly, about 13% reported avoiding any transformative agreements with caps on open access articles that can be published as a way to minimize the workload burden on librarians so they don't have to try to track these. Perhaps unsurprisingly, the most reported challenge associated with transformative agreements was financial at 38%. Many respondents were concerned about the long-term costs, but another 30% described standardizing workflow as a major challenge that they were facing. Because a lot of these agreements are different, they all kind of need their own workflow, so that was a major challenge. And kind of related to that, about 23% reported having insufficient personnel or time available to dedicate to managing these agreements. When filtered down to just small to mid-sized institution, this actually flipped. The most reported challenge was workflow management and then financial. And then some other challenges reported by libraries included managing information on multiple platforms, trying to gauge the effectiveness and the use of transformative agreements, and some restrictions on publisher content and what could be included, and some that were not fully open access. And only 11% reported no significant challenges or low impact. So for most libraries, working on a standardized workflow for transformative agreements was their solution to mitigating those challenges, and also emphasizing communication with publishers, faculty, other stakeholders, especially around library policies and limitations. Some libraries found methods of automation helpful or engaged in consortial agreements to limit the workload burden on individual libraries. Others had to reduce the number of transformative agreements that they were engaging in and try to negotiate with both publishers and their institutions for either better pricing or more institutional support. And about 9 respondents, 15%, reported that they found no workable solutions, at least that they could find. And notably, 8 of those 9 were from small to mid-sized institutions. So libraries did report some benefits from transformative agreements. 56% reported an increase in open access publishing and broadening access to knowledge as a benefit that they were seeing. Many libraries also reported more engagement with faculty when they had these agreements, or that these agreements were bringing good attention to the library and its mission. Some, about 11%, did see some cost savings or saw increased content available. So overall, our survey results kind of showed that for small to mid-sized institutions, they may be seeing a bit more cost effectiveness with transformative agreements, but they also struggle more with workflow development and management, often because of limited staffing and budget.
Yeah. So I want to thank Jamie and Kimberly for publishing and sharing the results of this survey, because I can say that at the University of San Diego, we're dealing with the same challenges as many of the survey respondents, and it is a relief to know that we are not alone. So as one of the case studies that you'll hear about today, the University of San Diego is a private R2, but we have a long history of being teaching focused rather than research focused. And we're really just starting to focus on research support and research impact. Our FTE for our student full-time enrollment sits between 8 to 9K, the annual variations. And we have 32 library employees total serving that population, with only 3 librarians in acquisitions and technical services. And we are supported by 4 staff. We started joining agreements just a couple years ago. We're pretty new to this in 2022. And since then, we have tripled the number of agreements we have, with up to 7 active agreements today in 2024. Our agreements are primarily cost neutral, similarly to a majority of the survey respondents in our institution size, with one of our agreements actually seeing a significant decrease in cost, great for us, due to the increase in open content that was being published. And then another of our agreements, we did see a cost increase, but we felt that that cost increase was justified due to the number of journals we were gaining access to. So I just joined the university last May in time to sign us up for a bunch more transformative agreements this year. And we didn't have anyone managing our transformative agreements at the time, so I became the de facto manager as our electronic resources librarian. Our library doesn't have a scholarly communication librarian, and we just have kind of Frankenstein together scholarly communication workflows between me and our digital initiatives librarian who manages our IR and just general ScholComm education. And to spread out that workload more sustainably, because that's a lot of people we're supporting between just 2 librarians, I've actually been working with the staff members I supervise in order to promote them where appropriate and update their positions to bring their jobs and skill sets up to date with our current library collection priorities and future just open directions. So, we're only 2 years in and we're still figuring things out. And I actually feel we're in a pretty lucky position despite these challenges you're hearing about. Most of our transformative agreements are consortial agreements, and our consortium does the heavy lifting of negotiating, managing approvals, and reporting. And then we rely heavily on publishers themselves as well as our library's subject liaisons to help with promotion and outreach. But even with our consortium managing the majority of our agreements, our biggest challenge is really still standardizing a workflow. I mean, how do we do all of this laundry list you're seeing back here? How do we manage tracking, promoting, evaluating, reporting, and providing specialized publishing support for our researchers without really dedicated staff or dedicated knowledge and skills? It's going to take us a little bit of time to build both of those up. And we also don't have dedicated funding for open access. So along with all of these challenges, education and outreach present another unique challenge for our university. And it's actually bigger for us at the moment than financial challenges, at least for our transformative agreements. We have mixed faculty buy-in for open access, and if you want to convince faculty to publish open, you really have to make it as easy and as appealing as possible with the low barriers. But every publisher has different APC coverage terms and different author acceptance workflows. So how are we addressing these challenges? Like I said before, it's a work in progress, and I think some of you all might be familiar with this space. I'm just kind of stuck in I've got a couple of spreadsheets and a LibGuide, and every day I'm like, oh my God, there has to be a better way. So I'm also investigating packaged alternatives for TA management. And the nice thing is that for us on our campus, we have other departments who are just as interested in research impact and output. So we're trying to figure out ways to partner together in these areas to identify common tools or data that we can share. And then education and outreach, one of our bigger challenges, has been the biggest area of focus for us in terms of just trying to get information out there about our agreements. And to start, what I did was create this LibGuide that provides straightforward summaries of all of our agreements with a standardized template of summary terms for each agreement. So it's really meant to be used to seek out fundamental information like what journals are covered by our agreement, who qualifies as this corresponding author, and what does the author acceptance workflow even look like for each publisher. And it's been really helpful both internally and externally for our subject liaisons who are not necessarily experts in scholarly communication to point our faculty to this resource if they have questions, and then for our faculty to be able to find the information themselves instead of having to go through multiple channels. And ever since I published this LibGuide back last December, it's been viewed 327 times. And then in addition to promoting our agreements, I started tracking inquiries about open access as we call them faculty consultations and Lib Insights. And what this does is help me to quantify exactly how many times someone talks to me about open access on our campus and what issues they're running into and what kind of interest they have in new agreements. And rather than reducing the number of TAs, we are planning to continue participating in new agreements, especially as a result of our consortium. And the way we're thinking about it is that funding for our traditional subscriptions are really being used to subsidize our transformative agreements. And then along with all of the previously mentioned benefits, like an increase in open access publishing, increase in read content that you saw from the survey, to me, the most surprising benefit to our library has really been this increase in library engagement with open access publishing from faculty. So this is a chart that I pulled out of Lib Insights. You can see that I started in May, and then in spring of 2024, we saw this just giant leap in faculty talking to us about open access. And as we move into 2025, I'm anticipating that this trend will continue.
So you'll hear a lot of similarities of what I'm going to say with our neighbors just down the road in California. Though there are also interesting differences. We are kind of a unique environment, single academic library that serves 7 separate institutions. They are contiguously located, but they are individual institutions. They are all private, teaching focused with low to medium research activity, about 7,500 combined FTE. And we have, out of 58 librarians on staff, 14 of us are in the division that contain collections, so that includes also systems and resource sharing. So not really all these people are engaged in licensing. We have a growing number of transformative agreements as well. We started with 1 in 2021, and we've been adding between 1 and 3 each year, currently at 7, and there's 2 more coming next year. The number of OA publications with the agreement also saw a big jump from each year. The number for 24 is partial, so both in terms of months and not all publishers, so it's unclear if the upward trajectory will hold. And then there's a wide variety of terms across the agreements, most of which equally negotiated by same consortium, SCELC, that Amy talked about. So some important highlights in terms of package costs. Inflation for all of our packages either remained at or close to previous level or decreased, in some cases, to 0. So overall, across the agreements, we are actually saving money. Compared to just staying at read. There's no additional cost added to the packages for publishing, and in some cases we're getting back credits. 1/3 of our agreements are multi-payer, which means that authors are asked to contribute grant funding if they have some. If not, they are covered by the agreement. All agreements cover hybrid journals. 7 also cover gold, and 1 just has discounts for gold. Most are fully uncapped in the number of sponsored APCs. Just 1 has a consortial cap in hybrid, and 1 has a consortial cap on gold only. And of the 7 agreements that are active today, 2 have had no OA publications at all, and they both in their 2nd year. The other 5 have very varied number of adoption. So it's really very unequal across agreements. Currently, a lot of manual work, good old-fashioned hard work is happening for the management of these agreements. A lot of it is happening at the level of SCELC. Thank you, SCELC. So they negotiate licenses, they collect and process publication data. So we, the Royal, we here get that information from the website, and it goes into a magical Google Sheet where I compare and contrast the terms across different publishers, correlate various pieces of data, like, for example, publication cost avoidance related to the cost of package, etc. And using that information, I also create the public-facing information LibGuides that are used by authors. It's a lot of work, but it's totally worth it. Our authors currently have access to over 7,500 journals to publish open access at no personal cost, as we call it, because obviously some have to contribute grant funding, but the vast majority are just fully funded. And they are also getting publication support in the form of the written workflows that we provide. And they get questions answered if they ask librarians, which is really not the case for all the places they publish. In terms of benefits for the library, we do get increased visibility in the research process, and it's just another avenue for us to support the global move towards open access. As I already said, we get no added costs for OA publishing. Instead, we're able to lower the read cost of our participating deals. The TAs are not without challenges, as I already mentioned. There's one challenge that is specific to our library. Because we have authors with at least 9 different affiliations under the umbrella of the Claremont colleges, it's always a big project to have it set up with publishers because they need to include all of these domains. Every publisher has slightly different way of identifying authorized authors, so that is a big deal. And then also at the point where we're collecting publication data, we also need to be very careful to catch all of these different affiliations to get the right data. In terms of auto workflows, the auto workflows obviously vary across publishers. We have little to no ability to brand them or customize them. It's hard for us to keep up and have accurate instructions. Sometimes they change and we don't know necessarily and might be delayed in updating our instructions. Title lists from different publishers come in different formats with different data points attached to them, either without assigned subject or with a subject that is not, of course, part of shared vocabulary across a controlled vocabulary across publishers. So it's a real challenge for us to create a combined list of available journals which could be then filtered for a researcher within certain subject area to find journals that are available to them. And also we don't always get the new lists as they change the moment they're active. Our current ILS and other collection management tools we're using are very unhelpful in managing these new workflows and capturing the data that we need for our evaluation. Internally, support is scattered across our organization. There isn't one dedicated person to do everything related to the transformative agreements. No, they realistically could be in an organization our size. I honestly believe this is an area of transition. We still talk about Skolcom as being one job and one thing and one person. Well, really, this is something that we all do and in some way impacts the work of multiple people across the organization, but we are still being constrained by job descriptions and definitions and org charts. In reality, different parts of the support for TA rightfully happen in different areas of the library and simply require close coordination and collaboration. And so we do pull our resources. The force will come together eventually. Collections is doing currently the bulk of the work at this time, again, with heavy reliance on support from SCELC. Since we are the one basically dealing with the licensing agreements and tracking the terms and understand all the details. We also prepare and update both the internal and external documentation. And I'm the one who trains the subject librarians on everything they need to know in order to support users. Subject librarians are the ones who answer questions that come through the regular Ask Us channels. And they could always push a question to me if needed, but so far they've been doing well, though it's a bit uneven across the departments. And they are the ones also who are doing outreach. Of course, that's also uneven. We get a little bit more enthusiasm in the science areas currently, but that's a process in development. The scholarly communications librarian role that is currently vacant lives in our Distinctive Collections and Digital Scholarship division. In that division, we have an associate role that is starting to take a little more active role in supporting the subject librarians with data for their outreach. And then both the consortium and us as a library individually are starting to look around for transformative agreement management tools that could help us with all of this work. So as I said, there's a lot that is across the libraries participating in the survey and us that resonates, but there's some unique individual challenges and that size is not necessarily a predictor. And now we invite you to ask us questions.
Oh, we already have someone who has a question. I just wanted to say that we skipped over a lot in our slides to leave you as much room as possible to ask questions. So if you want us to go back to any, just let us know and we'll expand.
I actually have two questions for you. One of them is, do your institutions have any sort of aspect of the institution that focuses specifically on faculty scholarship? I'm asking simply because my institution does, and we found it really helpful to collaborate with them in getting the word out about our transformative agreements.
So I can speak for the University of San Diego. We started our university's faculty scholarship recognition event in partnership with the Office of Sponsored Programs, and we're working together to figure it out, basically. I mean, we're looking at the same data, which is research output and research impact, and we're just trying to figure out which parts of the data are most relevant to us, and are there tools that we can all share together.
For us, this is part of our challenge. We are outside service as a library. We're not part of any of the 7 institutions. And while librarians have relationships and outreach to specific departments, it's not as obvious. We don't have just one faculty body. So I know some of the colleges have these ceremonies where they give awards to faculty, but that doesn't necessarily connect to the library.
And I just had a second thing real quick. There's a tool out there called SciFree that is kind of an index of all of the titles that are available for publish at your institution. It doesn't have subject headings yet, but it is useful and pretty affordable. Just putting that out there is another resource that you might need to look at.
How do you spell that?
SciFree. It's based out of Sweden.
For the schools that do have transformative agreements, I am curious about along the lines of the subject areas. Are you finding that they are more economical for you when they are in STEM disciplines as opposed to humanities and social science disciplines?
So of our 7,500 combined journals, 80% are STEM. Only 3% are in arts and humanities and 17% are in social sciences. But when I looked at the distribution of publications, 77% of all papers published in 22 were in arts and humanities. And last year, 53. So because there was suddenly a big jump in STEM, but because we're mostly liberal arts, though we have 50% science majors, there's a lot of interest in publishing in arts and humanities. But in terms of how much the agreements cost, they're all either neutral or decreasing. So we don't pay more for any of them.
For our university, when we started looking at options for transformative agreements and open access publishing in the humanities and in the social sciences, the conversation around funding got harder to navigate. It's really nice that our current agreements are cost neutral, and similarly to Maria, that they're STEM focused. But that's because the money was already there for us with those publishers. So it's a conversation that we're navigating. But I will say that our authors in social sciences and humanities are finding their way to these publishers that we have agreements with already. So it's not a barrier that a publisher happens to be STEM focused. At our university, actually, the biggest school that publishes under these agreements is our School of Business.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. So I had a question for for the research that was done earlier, and then for the folks who are engaging in transformative agreements, just asking, in the research, did it reveal, or was there any information from the institutions about like values or guidelines or principles that were kind of guiding their work and interest in perhaps going into transformative agreements? And then for the folks who are in them, do you all have like a set of values that you're using, like nonprofit publishers or university, like that sort of thing? Thank you.
Yeah, so we didn't, that actually wasn't one of our questions, but that would be a good one to ask. It did come up, I think, a few times just around more about the types of transformative agreements. There were a few responses that said, we're concerned about engaging in ones that are not fully open access. We are not interested in engaging ones that are like hybrid journals or anything like that, because they felt like it's kind of funding a barrier to open access almost. So that's most of what I remember seeing in the survey responses.
So this seems like a good time for a plug for other presentation where Amy and I are presenting on Friday, where we're actually spend a few minutes on showing our values and goals related to the transformative agreements. But yes, we do have, our consortium had a task force that sent a survey to the membership, and we worked to distill and came up with a list of values and goals collectively for SCELC. And then each of our institutions could have maybe just rearranged them slightly based on the individual priorities, but we do have a guiding list that we're
Thanks, Maria. I just want to say at the individual institution level, while we have adopted our consortium's values, I will say that we're transitioning from a place where transformative agreements have kind of happened to us into us actively pursuing open access publishing. And so we're trying to figure out how many of the values of our consortium we want to adopt at that individual institution level. Great, I think we're at time, actually. So yes, feel free to contact us, or we'll stick around for a couple of minutes if you have any questions you didn't want to ask on recording.